Good morning, Madison Hills. It's a little humid outside, huh? I wondered who would be here or not. I'm impressed. I'm really impressed with turnout. Good job, good job, good job. So several years ago, Michelle and I had an opportunity to take a really cool trip, and we had to fly across one of the oceans, and I want you to know that I'm a worse flyer than I am driver. I wondered who would laugh at that. Okay, I'm looking at you. Okay, all right. So I hate the dynamic. I hate the feel and everything like that. So I don't rest well. So I'm up for probably several hours before the flight takes off. We're going to fly into London, hang out for a day, and hopefully see some cool Harry Potter stuff. That's on our agenda, and then go forward with the trip. So all in all, I'm up about 40 hours on this trip because of the anxiety. And I miss London. We land, we go check in at the hotel. I lay on the bed, I'm out. I wake up, Michelle's gone. I'm like, oh gosh, she's been, abducted. She's gone. I need to call 911, find out where she's at and all this stuff. She returns to the hotel. She's been out sightseeing, just loving the dynamic and everything, and I miss it. We have about 3 hours left. The only two things I remember from London is it's a very fast-paced city. Like if you go into one of these shops or restaurants on the sidewalk, you step in there. Once you step out, you need to step out like running, because once you get on the sidewalk, it's moving. And we stopped at a McDonald's, and guess how much it cost for both of us to eat? McDonald's. 2 meals. It was over $30. I'm like, goodness, it's expensive over here. So anyway, we're on the flight, and we're moving, and Michelle's like, I'm going to sleep. And I'm like, how can you sleep in a moment like this? I mean, we're going 1,000 miles an hour at night, and we're above water, and this is just a dynamic that I don't like. And she's like, well, listen, I'm going to sleep. Here's the seatbelt. It's on. Here's my blanket. If the flight attendant comes by, just let her know that I'm buckled up so that she doesn't wake me up. Well, we go through that a few times, and I'm like, okay, she's buckled. It's all good. So the lady just goes by. But I wake her up multiple times, and I wake her up, and I'm like, hey, one time, I see this so clearly. We're just zipping through the air. She's over there, knocked out, and I just feel it. It's a little dip. And I wake her up, and I'm like, hey, baby, we're going down. We're going down. I feel it. It's over. Splash. They never find the pieces or a black box or anything. It's over. So I think I'm a little justified in my fear based on what happened recently. Are you aware of this picture? I mean, come on. And this is after it had landed and returned, right? This was going on mid-flight. Can you imagine? Mid-flight, half the plane is gone. What are you going to do? So this is why my terror, my fear of flying is real. But I want you to know, I'm able to take a time out. I can hit the pause button, I can take a step back, and I can realize a very important leadership principle from this photo. This is not possible. Even though it's scary and insane, this is not possible without vision. This would have never been possible without vision. Without two guys that we call the Wright brothers, a long time ago in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, who had a vision that we could put people in the sky on a plane and fly them places. This would not be possible. And the idea of a vision is what makes things happen. Some of you are very familiar with the stories in the New Testament, and a guy named the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul had a vision, and it was so important to him to go into Jerusalem that he's on his way, and somebody comes out of nowhere and intercepts him. And I bet you can really relate to this story, and it could be the reason why many of you in here this morning really need a redo. So a guy named Agabus comes out of left field and intercepts Paul, who's on his way to Jerusalem. And Paul is fully aware that there's going to be trouble awaiting him in Jerusalem. And Agabus comes along, and he was a prophet. So he was a guy who knew his stuff. And he intercepts Paul, and he says, hey, time out, big boy. You have no idea what's going to happen if you actually land in Jerusalem. And then he does this really dramatic thing where he takes his belt off of Paul and he ties himself up like one of those rodeo shows where they rope the calf. You know what I'm talking about, Tommy? Yeah, they rope the calf and they tie it up and all that stuff. He does something like that. He says, this is what's going to happen to you. And then Paul looks at him without missing a beat. And again, I think you can step into the story there, some of you. You need a redo because you had a very clear direction in life. There was a relational, a financial, and educational vision you had, and someone else started speaking into your story, and they knocked you off balance, and you would give anything for a redo. Well, Paul looks at Agabus and he says, give me my belt. Puts his belt back on and he says, I'm not only willing to be bound in Jerusalem, I'm willing to die when I get there. That's a vision that Paul has that has captivated him. He's willing to die for his faith. That's important. That's why a vision is defined as this, and it's one of the most beautiful definitions I've ever heard. A vision it's a picture of the future that produces passion in people. And you've experienced that before. Your heart rate goes up a little bit. Maybe you feel a little sweaty. You get a little excited. You sit up because you know something really cool could be a part of your future. And it messes with you in a really good way. That's why Proverbs 29:18 says, where there is no vision, people perish. And when I read this verse and I read it in context, I don't think the author is saying where there's no vision, people die. I don't think he's saying that. I think he's saying where there's no vision, the spark is gone. You don't see that fire in people's eyes because nobody's fired up. Shoulders sag. And if it's a group, well, nobody comes early and nobody stays late because there's no direction. And I have to say, Madison Hills, if I could step over here for just a second, totally different vibe here. People are coming early, talking. People are staying late, talking. I was here one Sunday, and a handful of us in here talking, chatting up, catching up, and people in the foyer were talking, and then the lights started flickering. And that was our cue from somebody to say, okay, wrap it up. We need to go, because people are hanging out, because there's a feel, a vibe of direction here. But without it, people miss out. That's why vision is so stinking important. It is a picture of the future, and it produces a passion in people that says, I want in on this. That's where we step into the story of Nehemiah. You remember from last week, the walls around Jerusalem have just been decimated. And this wrecks Nehemiah. It bothers him. That's his people. That's his area. That's his culture. He understands that. And it messes with him. And it's like, we can't stay like this. So Nehemiah, when we read the story, he does something profoundly important. And one of my favorite communicators that I've listened to for years has this great way of talking about what Nehemiah does. Nehemiah actually casts a vision for his people. And if you remember last week, when Nehemiah, he's done with his vision casting, the people are like, yes, we want in. So they started rebuilding and they said, let's get to work. We want in on this. We want this preferred future. What you've painted for us, yes, we're all in. But what Nehemiah does is so stinking important. And is anybody interested in what I'm about to draw? You think it's going to be a picture? Yeah, I hope it doesn't disappoint. And you really don't want me to draw because I'm not that good of an artist. But what Nehemiah does is amazing. This is the word here. 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 If that's hard for you to read, you should read my other stuff that I write. It's bad. Nehemiah says, we're here. You see the trouble we're in. Chapter 2, notice what he says. You see the trouble we are in. Look at everything in ruins and burned. Look at this rubble. You see it. We all see it. And for 150 years, that had been the case. And it's not until Nehemiah comes along and says, look, what's happening? And are you really comfortable with this? And if I could press it a little farther, if it is connecting with you, this idea that someone snatched vision out of your life and derailed you, that I bet over the years, you've become really comfortable with just hanging around here when you know there is a much better place called there. My favorite communicator said, when you cast a vision and you move people from here to there, he said he spent about 2 decades, once a year, standing in front of people and casting this crazy cool vision like Nehemiah is doing for his people. And he said he would cast this crazy cool vision, and then Monday morning he would open his inbox and there would be people saying, that was a great speech, but we like it here and we still don't want to go there with you. It's interesting, but we don't want to go there with you. We're going to hang around here. He said it took him 2 decades to realize what Nehemiah is doing. Nehemiah doesn't start out saying, hey, everybody, let's go here. This is going to be fun. Let's hang out up here. Let's pack and start the journey. Instead, it took him 20 years to discover what Nehemiah does in painting a picture of why you can't stay here. The walls leveled. We're in disgrace. This is not God's vision for his people. This is not God's vision for Jerusalem. This is not God's vision for what should be happening right now. We're in disgrace. Then he paints that picture, and then everybody, their attention's like, oh, we get it. You're right. We've become so comfortable, we've forgotten that a redo is even an option. And then what you do is you say, you know what? Here's a better option for us. There. So he says, let's rebuild, and then we will no longer be in disgrace. And the people get it. It clicks. And they say, let's start rebuilding. Now, check-in question. Which do you think, here, or here? Where do you think this vision is going to start to leak? Where do you think you're going to have the most difficult part of this journey phase? Where's going to be the most difficult part of this? Starting out? If you need to get something going in your own life, or like the life of a church, where's going to be the most difficult phase? Here, or here? It's going to be here. You know how I know that? From this picture right here. Some of you know this show, some of you don't. This is called The Office. This got my attention 15 years ago, and I tell you, I keep it on the background 90% of my life. It's just rerun after rerun. Do we use rerun anymore? It's just streaming constantly in the background. Just once season 9's over, season 1 starts again, and I just keep watching it. But just humor me for a second if you're not familiar with the show. It's a sitcom, it's a comedy, but these characters, Daryl's driving the truck and he works in the warehouse, and this is Michael, who's a regional manager of a paper company. So he's in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and this is a gal who's head of the HR at this particular office. And these two kind of fall in love and they have this relationship, and eventually in the story they get married and all that. But this is a season where the CFO realizes that these two are dating. Michael and Holly, they're dating, and that's against the rules. So he transfers Holly 8 hours away. So they're making plans about how they're going to continue to keep the fire going in this relationship. And as they're traveling here, this is a company truck, they've got all of Holly's stuff, and they're driving her 8 hours away. So in the van, they're talking about, okay, what are we going to do? Well, as soon as I get off work on Friday, I'll drive 8 hours, we'll sleep, we'll get up early Saturday morning, and then we'll have all day Saturday together. We'll sleep in Sunday, and then I'll drive back and get back home late Sunday. They're like, okay, yeah. And then they start to really talk about the logistics of that, and they need a break. So 4 hours into the trip, they stop. And they stop in an area where there's only basically a restroom. There's nothing else around. And reality sets in. The reality of what it's going to take to keep this going. So they get back in the van and they're like, we're only halfway there? Can we do another 4 hours? And if I'm not mistaken, Patrick Sawyer is a guru with the show. So I think this is mistaken. He will probably fact check me on this line after the service. But I think the line that they drop is this even worth it? Is this even worth it? And you've been there, haven't you? You've got a trip going along. You've got the coffee, everybody's juice. If it's cold, they've got their blankets and everything. Maybe their device. You got the news or the music on the radio, and you're zipping down the interstate. And then about halfway through the trip, you're like, should we have flown? And then I'm like, no, you shouldn't have. Driving is the best option. So, you get that, and it's halfway there. Right here, everybody's fired up. It's new, it's exciting. There's a realization that, we can make a difference. And then right before you get there, everybody's like, yeah, we've got one last push in us. Let's make this happen. Yes, we're almost there. But here it's like, oh, come on. Well, that's what happens in the story of Nehemiah. Notice how the story goes on. So the people work, and they work with all their heart, and they build the wall to half its height. Half its height. And an exact translation from the Hebrew there would say, the people had the heart to work. They had the heart to work. And they worked. They made it happen. Halfway. Just a few verses later, we read, meanwhile, there's a few things that happen in those verses. Meanwhile, the strength of the laborers is giving out. Halfway, it's giving out. Vision is great, but vision leaks. We fill our vision buckets up every Sunday morning, and I don't know about you, and maybe I shouldn't say this as the pastor, but around Monday, Tuesday, that vision from Sunday is starting to leak. Jobs, bills, children, vacations, daily responsibilities, they come in, and we get going, but the reality of life sets in. So Nehemiah does something, and he realizes he needs to do this. He has got to keep this vision alive. But before we get there, I want to check in with you. And I want to ask you a question. Another one of my favorite communicators dropped this line. They had been involved in ministry for some time, and it started weighing on them. And they started connecting with their staff, and then they started connecting with some of the other people in the church. And it became this church-wide initiative because everybody kind of felt this. They were doing some really cool things in their church. And the check-in question was this, and this guy said, I simply wrote this in my journal one day. And then I started checking in with my team and my staff and the people that I shepherd and pastor. And everybody was feeling a degree of this. And I'm curious if any of you feel this, and not necessarily your connection to Madison Hills, but with that connection of that redo that you really need. And he wrote these words. He said, the work of God, I realized the way that God was working out in me, the way of God's work in my life, was actually destroying the work of God in me. And I think that captures what was happening with Nehemiah's people. They put in so much effort, so much attention. They got there halfway, and then the strength started giving out. And I'm wondering if that connects with any of you. Maybe you've got a really rapid pace right now. Or what's going on is straining some stuff at home that shouldn't be strained. And you think it's something that God wants you to be involved in. But the way you're going about it is actually uprooting, hurting, destroying the work of God that should be taking place in you. I can see that happening with Nehemiah. And I want to make sure, and this is one of the reasons I'm drawing attention to this, I never want that to be the case here. Anything we do, whatever we put our attention toward, whatever initiative we do, whatever we think God is drawing us into to move His purposes forward, I never want it to destroy the work of God in our lives. So I want to check in with you. And if you need to touch base, you need your pastor to pray with you, you need to work through some stuff, please let me know if this dynamic is relevant to you. Fair? Okay, so Nehemiah does something that any great leader would do. He says, I see what's happening here. So he's like, I need to check in with the people and ask them a very important question. I need to look at my people who have built this halfway and say, okay, we've got some work to do. There's another halfway to go to completion here. And we've got to get this rebuilt so that we can carry on God's vision so we're not in disgrace and we can do the work that He wants us to do. So we've got to ask ourselves this question. Is what we're doing, is it hard? And the answer would be yes. Then he asks this question. Well, is it doable hard? Or is it destructive hard? And there's a big difference. Everything's going to be hard. But is it doable hard? Or is it destructive hard? And I think this might be true for you because it's true for me. There are times when I flip those and I give David Green an easy way out. It's doable hard, but I give myself a way out saying, oh, that's destructive. And I want to make sure I'm getting clear with those in my own heart and mind. So when you think of it, is it doable hard or is it destructive hard? Destructive is going to be harmful. It's going to be harmful to you and to the people who count on you. But doable hard is going to be doable. And it's going to be helpful. Hard, yes, but helpful and doable. So that's where you may find yourself as well this morning. So in Nehemiah comes along and says, hey, we're halfway here. And I get it. I understand that the strength is giving out. So we need to ask ourselves a question. Can we get there? Should we get there? Should we go forward? And the answer is yes. So this is an interesting part of the story. The story goes on, and they have a little conflict that comes their way. And we're going to unpack that next week, the kind of conflict and how we respond to it. They have some conflict that comes their way. And there's some people who are upset simply because they want to rebuild this wall. That's the only problem they have, that they want to rebuild this wall. Some people are upset about it, fussing about it. It's intense, and we'll unpack that next week. So they get around to talking about this, and Nehemiah's like, look, we've got to go ahead. God's in this, and it's hard, but it's doable. So they all take a step forward, and the text tells us that it was so tension-filled that people were bringing this tension to them. It started to get violent. So the people who were working on the wall would hold their tool in one hand and a weapon in the other to make sure this wall got built. So everyone was in agreement. This is going to be hard, but it's doable. So you know what happened? A few verses later you read, and this wall was rebuilt in a record 52 days. They got there. They got there. And you read the rest of Nehemiah, and some of that conflict and tension, it goes away, and this beautiful story unfolds where everybody's getting involved. Everyone's participating. Everyone is finding their spot. And it just moves God's purposes forward. And it exposes the world to the truth of this living God that we serve. It's an amazing story. Beautiful. And that's what's happening here. Now, it's not lost on me when I read this story that right before this dynamic unfolds, Nehemiah visits Jerusalem, and he goes around and he examines the wall, but he enters through these gates. There's several gates. You read this right before he casts this really cool vision to the people. There are these gates that he goes through to examine everything that's happening. Like, he doesn't climb over the rubble, and maybe some of the areas where it was leveled, he could have had an easier entrance or whatever, or it was quicker or more available to him. No, he strategically goes through these gates and then looks at the area. I think that may be one reason that Jesus actually refers to himself as a gate. Some of you are perceptive and you're very familiar with the Gospels, and you remember Jesus said, I'm actually the gate. And if anyone enters through me, then he will be saved. He's the gate. And it's interesting to me that a gate, and I didn't know this, maybe I'm late to the game, maybe you know this, you're fully aware of this. There's a big difference between a gate and a door. Did you know that? I did not know that until I read this particular wording by a specific author. But anyway, a gate, is a point of entry and exit. And in the ancient world, during times of peace, the gate into the city was actually a social spot for community. It's an opening. It's access, if you will. Jesus says, I'm the gate. Now, the difference between a door and a gate is this, according to everything that I've read. And again, maybe I'm late to the game, and if you knew this, I'm embarrassed to say I didn't. But apparently, a door is an opening to an area that has a roof. And a gate is an opening into an area that has no roof. It's an opening just to this space, which is why Jesus would say, I'm the gate. I'm the opening, not to a specific covered spot, but to a shared space. I'm access to this thing called salvation. So it's really interesting to me that Nehemiah went through the gates. And when I think about Madison Hills and I think about our future, I think there's a few gates that we can make sure are open for people to easily access this shared space of following Jesus. And the first gate would be what we talked about last week, our online presence. Do you know, studies suggest that people will visit a church up to 12 months online before they first step foot on the church's property. A year of following a church before they actually come and see the faces. Isn't that amazing? So last week, after we talked a little bit about the online presence, I wanted to share a few stories with you. I was on the phone with someone about 2 hours after church last Sunday, and their words were, hey, I'm sorry I couldn't be there, but I was able to catch you online. I had a conversation with a couple out in the foyer that said, we're so thankful you all have an online presence because so-and-so can't be here and they would love to be here, but they can catch you online, and we're so thankful that's available. This is the world in which we live. We had some people in attendance last week who followed us for a few months before visiting us for the very first time. And if I can share one more story with you, this is why this is important. This is why our donor is giving us $7,000 to make sure that everything's working right and we're meeting people in that gate of our online presence. I got this text last Monday after service. Someone had reached out and said, hi, I just finished yesterday's service on YouTube, and I wanted to thank you for putting the services online for me to watch. I had not been to church in years, but I had read my own devotionals, but I hadn't been to church in years until I found Madison Hills last year. And I no longer live in Richmond, so I keep up with you all online. And I'm very grateful for the donor who will be helping with your online presence. So I want you to know, this is the world in which we live, where we can really make an authentic connection with someone online. And that's why we're investing into that gate. And we want to make sure that we're rebuilding it in the right way. The other gate is our discipleship process. That's just a churchy word of saying, how do you take a first-time guest into a fully engaged follower of Jesus, where they're finding their spot, where they understand their role in this community, and God is using them and helping them mature and grow and develop in their faith, and finding where they fit in terms of serving and building up this body. So last Thursday, I sat with an individual at Purdy's, and we sat in the one on Main Street, which is just a phenomenal place. You know, I love that spot. We're upstairs in what they call the loft, and we're talking, and this individual, we had had a couple of conversations before about finding their spot at Madison Hills. And we have this conversation sitting across the table over a cup of coffee, and this person tells me about this idea for a prayer initiative that they have. And I'm like, well, tell me a little bit more about that. They talked to me about a prayer that they want to present to the church next Sunday. And they unpack it a little bit. I'm like, that's phenomenal. That's going to be great. And I touched base with Bob just to make sure, hey, Chairman, what do you think about this? And he was like, oh, I think it's a great idea. So I chat a little bit more with this individual, and it leads to this idea where the spark is there. And it was like Nehemiah. You saw the vision popping up in this person's life and set up straight. And then started leaning in and speaking about what this could look like. And just cast a very short and brief vision to me about this monthly thing, this monthly prayer initiative that could be part of Madison Hills. And you know, the prayer thing is one of the things we want to make sure is an integral part of our mission moving forward. And I'm listening, I'm like, that's it. That's it. Let's run with this. And how do you feel about leading and making sure this happens? And the individual's like, yes, so let's create a team to make sure that this can become a reality. And that's what we want to do. When you come through those doors, it's not just to sing. It's not just to listen to me ramble for a half hour. It's to really find what God wants you to do to help build up his body and his kingdom. And we want to make sure we're giving ample attention to that process, because that is a gate people are going to go through. And we just don't want to leave them in the seats. We want to make sure they're in the game. Now, the third one is our next generation. And this doesn't have a particular age boundary to it, but it's just the up-and-coming generation. And when I was sorting through this, I couldn't help but to think about my kids. I couldn't help but to think about my kids. And some time ago, many of you know that I was part of Northeast staff for several years, but when we first got connected with Northeast, it was just as attenders. We walked onto their property one day, visited the church, and I saw their children's ministry area, and I was like, oh, that's super cool. And I saw their student ministry, and I'm like, oh, that's super cool. So I got in touch with the children's minister. My children were young, and they were going to be under that tutelage for a little bit. And I said, what's your vision for children's ministry? And this lady looked at me and she said, no one's ever asked me that before. And I said, well, on the spot, what do you got? And she said, well, I want you to know that we're very hands-on in discipling children. We don't want to just provide a space for them while their parents worship. We don't want to just give them some snacks and that's it. We want to make sure we're teaching them and introducing them to this guy, Jesus, and to this book we call the Bible, and what this means. We want them to become familiar with the stories, and not just the Old Testament stories of Noah's Ark. We want them to become familiar with the stories of Jesus and Paul and his missionary journeys. And I'm like, hold up, I don't know some of this stuff. Slow down. Just kidding. I thought that'd get a laugh. That didn't get a laugh. All right, there we go. So she cast this vision to me, and that was several years ago. And I think about Christian and Sophie and Bella now, and I look at their lives and I'm like, some of that was because of them. I'm not kidding when I say, and you may not know this, you may not recognize this yet, because we're moving forward. We're starting our journey. But I fully believe that the most important ministry that Madison Hills has happens downstairs. If we don't build into that and make it everything that has the potential to be, this church over time will be like all other churches. It'll hit the plateau and then start to decline. And over several years, maybe a couple of decades, it'll slowly die. We've got to make that an opening, a gate for us. Who knows what the future holds when we build in to our children and our students. That's the future. Our fourth gate, and this is evolving and one that I'm really excited about, is our community involvement. And we've been talking a lot with a small team of us about how we want to make sure that we are involved in the community and that the community also sees us as part of the community. So this go and be and come and see dynamic, where we're in the community because we're here, we're using our property and our facility to make sure that if we can resource the community in any way, we're going to. And if we can go out also and lift the city up. And we're working with a small team that's strategically putting several opportunities for us throughout the year, especially in the second and fourth quarters, where we can really lift this city and meet the needs. I think about what we did with Grace Now last month, which was phenomenal. And then we can keep building on that and taking it to the next level and identifying those needs that you and I can literally meet as Madison Hills Christian Church. And then using that as a gate, an opening, an easy access point to invite people into the shared space of following Jesus. Those gates are great. And I think they coalesce with what's going on in Nehemiah's life. Now, I'm almost done. I got about 25 minutes left, all right? I'm just kidding. The little time we have left, I want to just recall last week. If you remember, Nehemiah had this vision, and he felt God was dropping this into his heart. And he wanted to really get involved. And what he did is he was doing his job one day as the cupbearer to the king. And the king comes in and says, hey, it looks like you're a little off today. You know how you look at your family or your friends or someone you work with, they just look a little off. So it's like, you look a little off today. What's going on? Well, Nehemiah's cupbearer should have always been on top of his game. He wasn't allowed to have a bad day, but he risked something. He risked his job and his reputation. And he said, well, if you're really asking, this is going on in Jerusalem, and it's bothering me. It's messing with me. And the king looks at him and says, well, what do you want to do? And the text tells us that Nehemiah prayed one of those brief prayers that you've probably prayed before. Something's going on. Somebody you're meeting with drops something in your lap, and you have no idea what to do with it. So you say, God help me. God help me. And with the prayer, I assume Nehemiah took a big gulp and a deep breath, made some eye contact, and took a step forward. And then he told the king what he wanted. And after he told the king what he wanted, the text tells us that Nehemiah said, and also, can you provide all of these resources to make this happen? He says, I want to rebuild the wall, and you're the king, so I need you to resource the whole initiative. And the king follows through. And then he tells the people later on, after things are rolling, he tells the people, Nehemiah does, about how God's hand of favor is upon him and what the king said. So with the little bit of time I have left, I'd like to take a big gulp, deep breath, make some eye contact, take a step forward. And I want you to know that if what I'm about to say for the next 5 minutes doesn't apply to you, I get that, and I respect that, and that's okay. I used to go to this conference where halfway through every single year it was the same thing. They'd have killer music, killer teaching, then halfway through there was a dip in everything, and it was a time where they asked for money. And at that time, people left. About half the people would go to the restroom, concession center, whatever, and come back. I want you to know, if you're a first-time visitor here, one of our first-time guests, we don't talk about money a lot. And we never guilt trip people about money. And that's not part of our DNA. And it never will be. So you just happen to be here on a Sunday where it is a moment where we're going to talk a little bit about money. But I want to do so in a very intentional way. After service last Sunday, I was out in the foyer, and a lady came up and she hugged me. And then she started talking to me. And I could see in her eyes something was going on. And I could hear her heart. But she looked at me, and if I remember this correctly, it's one of those things where she's kind of holding my elbows, or my arms are like that right there, but her arms are like this, and she's talking to me, and she says, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make a contribution to this church. And I could see the fulfillment in her eyes. That the financial contribution that she was going to make, it meant something to her. And I want you to know, now we're down to the next 3 minutes. The next 3 minutes of what I'm saying calls your ears to attention. I believe it can be Holy Spirit directed. And I believe that the next 3 minutes can be some of the most meaningful moments you've ever experienced at church. When I read the story of Nehemiah and he gets things rolling, and he starts getting this rebuilding campaign going, and people get involved, and they come alongside of him, and the walls start going up. I can't overlook the fact that money was never an issue for Nehemiah. A lack of resources never, ever, ever got in the way. I'm still learning some of you. So this isn't targeted to anyone, because I don't know. This is just me trying to have favor and step into the story of Nehemiah. And I'm treating you like the king. But you know, we never want money to be an issue at Madison Hills. When we start making these gates, those easy openings for people to access the shared space of following Jesus, we never want lack of resources to block us from what God is wanting us to do. So a couple of contributions that if you made that could really help us. One would be to help balance the budget. When we look ahead at 2024 and the whole year, we may be about $65,000 shy of what we would love to do And I told you a few weeks ago, when the elders and I crafted the vision for 2024, there was a lot of prayer and a lot of conversation that went in on it. And we tried to be aggressive and assertive with it and think, this would be phenomenal if we could put all of this into motion and all of this into practice. But we're about 65,000 short of doing every bit of that. But I hope you know, with those stories of the gates that I told just a moment ago, it's worthy of our investment. It's worthy of our contribution. It's worthy of our time. So if you, like the lady last week, can make a contribution, we would love it. And this is really where I'm going to take a big gulp, because I don't know you. I don't know your finances or anything like that. But I do know that sometimes people love to serve in ways that only make sense for them. And sometimes the things that make sense for them, other people see it and it doesn't make any sense to them. But they're in a position where it makes total sense. And what they're able to do is something that other people can't. And that's why they do it, because it helps. You may be one of those people who are interested, and I know there's people out there, I've met them before, who are interested in making sure that debt never gets in the way or distracts us from the mission of God. And you know that in June, our monthly mortgage is going to bump up to around $5,000 a month. And that's $2 million. That's a $2 million note. Some of you may be interested in just taking that over or wiping that out and making sure it doesn't become a burden at Madison Hills. We would love for you to pray about that contribution. Now, if you're coming back, that section of the conference is over and people have got their popcorn and their soda. They're coming back. They know that the music's about to kick back in and everything. So that moment's over. And we'll put that in the lap of the Holy Spirit. And if those two things apply to us, fantastic, we'll run with it. And if they don't, they don't. And we will still move forward. But last thing, January 28th is a day for you to contribute your life. A day where you can put some skin in this game. And you can take a stake and drive it in the ground and hit it with a hammer like you've never have before. January 28th is going to be what we would call a membership Sunday. And to use a little dated language, some people love to place membership at a church. It's where I'm saying I'm part of this community. This is my church home. This is where I'm going to give my attention, my resources, my time, my energy, my prayers, my efforts. These are my people and I can count on them. I'm going to become a member there. And I want you to know that we're going to do this, and the Poulters are going to do this, and the Green family is going to do this, because I don't know how you feel about this, but I'm just going to put it out there. I'm going to be here for a long, long time. And I want you to know that. So the Green family and the Poulter family, we're going to become members of this church. And we want to lead by example. So if that's something that's weighing on your heart, where you want everyone to know, yes, I'm part of what God is doing at 960 Red House Road, then we want to know that, and we want to put you on the schedule for that so that we can make that happen. But that'll be 2 weeks from today. And here's why I think that's important. When you read Nehemiah, and you read through chapter 3, the text tells us that the people went to work, and some people built, and some people rebuilt, and some people repaired. And then you read the rest of the chapter, and 12 times the phrase "next to them" pops up. So-and-so was building this part of the wall, and next to them it was so-and-so. And next to them it was you. 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 And they built this wall next to each other. You need people who don't just get you. You need people beside of you who get the work of God in you. And that's what we want to be for you. We want to be your family. So what I want you to do right now, and I'm done. Okay? I'm done. And next week will not be this long. I want you to get out your device, if you will. This will take you 60 to 90 seconds. And I want you to go to madisonhills.org/connect. And there's just a little brief page there where you can fill out some basic info, your name, your email if that's how you want to be contacted, and then a brief message. And I want you to just send us a message of how you want to be a participant here at Madison Hills. If it's the financial game, fantastic. If it's the membership thing, fantastic. If you want to write us a message and say, I'm not sure, I need help, fantastic. But that's your next step. Missy Pate, many of you have met her. And you've talked to her, and she tells this story, and I called her a few days ago and asked if I could share this as well. So Missy is a gal who represents what we're talking about. She represents getting plugged in. She represents finding her purpose. She represents allowing church to become her family. And she tells a story that several years ago, she was sorting some things out in her mind, and it wasn't looking too good. And I happened to see her in Starbucks in Lexington one morning, and she'd been on my heart and mind for some time. And I went over to her table, and we chatted for a few minutes, and I said, hey, I've got an idea, and I would love for you to be a part of it. And when Missy retells that story, I didn't know all the details, but she tells the story this way. She says, that moment literally saved her life. Without that moment of invitation, she was thinking about exiting this planet. You never know what inviting someone into the ministry of Madison Hills will do for them. That's why I've taken some risks this morning, because inviting someone into this can literally save a life. God, we thank you. We thank you for the gate, Jesus Christ, the man who has literally saved our lives. And we trust, Father, that what has been said and done here this morning is in your hands. And there's no fault, there's no guilt, there's just simply men and women who want to give you everything we possibly can to move your purposes forward. So, Father, we trust you with today, just like Nehemiah did. And we trust you in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.